Good evening, everyone. Wow, a full house. Penny and I are really pleased to have everybody come and join us. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. There is a door in the back you can get out if we have to get out fast. The big door is open. I'm going to ask you to turn off your telephones and other distracting electronic devices. And the format is going to be brief introduction. Archer has the floor for talking and question and answers and his usual shtick. And then I'm going to ask you to stand up, kick the back of your chair, and lean it against the wall so that people can get around and not trip over each other, etc. The refreshments and homemade cookies and cider will be at the front with the books. Archer's going to stay back here to sign because that makes it a little bit smoother managing this many wonderful fans. We have a full calendar of events for the fall. I'm not going to go through them all. Just a week from tonight is a poetry reading. Two poets whose parents actually both live in Lyme, though they don't know each other, are going to be sharing the microphone. And then on the last Saturday in October, we're really excited to have Michael Caduto, the naturalist, and Mary Holland, the naturalist. They both have new books, and we actually have samples in the front if anybody's interested in seeing them. And it's going to be just a signing and a meet and greet. It's not going to be a formal presentation, and that's Saturday morning. So since this is Archer's 23rd visit to the Norwich Bookstore, many of you have been to at least one of those gatherings. I was thinking he doesn't need an introduction, but there must be something you don't know. So I did a little digging. Didn't come up with much, but he was born in Mount Kisco, New York, and grew up in the U.S., Canada, and France, and he graduated from Yale, which I hadn't remembered. He worked in the U.S. and France as an editor, a journalist, a political advance man, a theater photographer, medical illustrator, researcher for Time Life Books, and a lab technician for Paris Match magazine. So that's quite a resume. He also worked for the University of Texas Press in the late 1970s, where as special projects editor, he found and caused to be published the Book of Merlin, the hitherto barely known conclusion to T.H. White's famous The Once and Future King. And I think we all know that he's the death investigator for the Vermont office of the chief medical examiner, is a detective in Windham County, travel writer for AAA, and he has 25 years' experience as a volunteer firefighter, which all inform this wonderful series of mysteries. He wrote the first Joe Gunther novel, Open Season, in 1988, and Presumption of Guilt is the 27th. And in it, we have the pleasure of meeting Tag Man. How many people have read Tag Man? It was one of my favorites. And his daughter. And I devoured this book in one day. So without further ado, help me welcome Archer Mayer.
Good Lord, no. I hold it, I'll drop it. Pretend to bellow anyhow, but I'll try to use this and be well behaved. Don't hit me with it, that is. At the bottom of 6 kids, I'm used to being hit. Okay. Relax, honest. I only wish people I interviewed, that is to say interrogated, responded as well as I do to one of these terrible things. It's terrible, but I'll deal with it. First, I'll strip to show that I'm feeling good and guilty. Now I need to develop a twitch. They call that a tell. It's a horrible thing. If you move your foot, you'll ruin everything. And then I'll be guilt-free. So you just heard the resume of an enormously unemployable, shiftless person. That explains why.
We can't hear you in the back.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to try something else. If I speak like I usually speak, can you in the back hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, all right, excellent. Now we're at a more comfort level. Okay, so In 1980, I guess I came face to face with the resume you've just been submitted to and realized that I was probably better off, as were all of you, if I was unemployed. I've been unemployed ever since, and rather happily so, I might add, because the first thing I did upon hanging up my lack of shingle in 1980 was that I moved to an environment where it seemed everybody was unemployed. I came to Vermont. And you guys embraced me instantly. You gave me 3 jobs, which I still have, and I never looked back. So I'm a very happy camper. And I sort of ended up, these jobs ended up sort of communicating to one another. The firefighting and the rescue work and the cop stuff and the medical examiner stuff. My daughter calls, the corpse job versus, the living person job. Actually, that reminds me that not terribly long ago, even medical examiners get called at inappropriate moments. That's when the clientele is still alive. And I'm standing there with what the same daughter calls the corpse kit. You're sort of getting a theme now. Well, needless to say, it doesn't look like a first aid kit. It doesn't have all those helpful symbols plastered all over the outside of it that are supposed to give people a sense of confidence and good cheer when they see you. Mine is jet black and unmarked, and I look the way I look now. And so I'm standing next to the guy. We had gone into a house to this lady hadn't been heard from for a while, so they figured rather prematurely, as it turns out, oh, well, she's no longer with us. Well, she was, and so I'm standing there, and she was in some disrepair, so EMS had been called. And of course, I used to be an EMS for 25 years, so I was watching all of them do whatever they do, and I stood next to the guy who was next to me, who also no longer does EMS, and I said, I'm so happy to be out of that business now. Fussing about that they were doing. I don't have to do that anymore. I work in a very quiet environment. But enough about me. So, this makes for sometimes very short talks. The reason the exit was displayed early on was because either I get thrown out or you leave me all alone fairly shortly. Number, God, what is 27? This is 27. I don't know what the title of it is. Presumption of guilt. Presumption of guilt. I have now, Margot, my wife, the brains, who runs the whole business, told me the other day that I actually came up with that title, which was new on me. Very catchy title, one of my better ones. And I was asked on an earlier, I call these author imitations, to tell a little bit about what the book's about. I, of course, hadn't the slightest idea. And I glanced at it, and presumption of guilt, the title didn't ring a bell. There was nothing going on in my head about this book. So I've now brushed up. There is a guy in the basement who actually cranks these out, but he's not as good looking as I. So I stand in for him. You can just imagine what he looks like. Presumption of guilt started 2 years ago. It takes me a year, takes them a year to publish them. That's how it works. So yes, next year is written.
Wow.
It's a very sexy title. Prepare yourself. Number 28. I'm working on something better than that, but that's what we got. Presumption of guilt was born in the post office because I, like everybody in the state of Vermont, you go to the post office, you don't go for your mail, for God's sake. I mean, you hope in a way that the slot's empty because you didn't really have pockets filled with junk anyhow. You go there for the gossip. You go to catch up on who's doing what to whom and all that good stuff. Margot knows that when I go down to the post office, which is almost within sight, that she won't see me for 45 minutes, easy. So sure enough, and the first person I run into is Marty. I don't actually know what Marty looks like because he's only that tall and he wears a leather cowboy hat. A haberdasher's dream he is not. But he's got a head, I know that much. He's got a voice that comes out from under the hat. And he told me with great glee that he'd gotten employed. Well, of course, in Vermont, that actually has some weight. So I asked him by whom, and he said that, and this was 2 years ago, remember now, date is crucial. He said, Vermont Yankee just hired me as their spokesman. Now, how do you tell a guy that his employer just went out of business? Kind of an awkward moment that the one and only piece of spokesmanship he's going to, voice is that he's fired. Well, it turns out he was far cleverer than I because, of course, Vermont Yankee isn't just a name. It's something that's going to be there glowing for 200 years. So this man's employed, his children are employed. It's one of those things like, son, someday all this will be yours. This guy's good. So sure enough, 2 years later, Marty's still in place, still talking about God knows what, because even the protesters have gotten bored. There's nobody there anymore. It's 130 acres of wilderness and concrete. But Marty, early on, he was very enthusiastic. He was the spokesman, after all, and he wanted something to spoke about. So he said to me, "You need to kill someone at Vermont Yankee." Isn't that what we've been talking about for 40 years? Whoa, are you on the low end of the learning curve or what? So he said, no, you need to, you need to bury someone. Well, it turns out. Librarians, for example, are an inordinately bloody-minded lot. I don't know how many of you are related. I've got several in my family. But librarians are very, very dark. And every librarian I've met has always asked me to kill someone in their place of employment. This is not a new recruit on me. Everyone's always asking me to kill somebody somewhere. And so far I deny having ever acted on it, in fact. But in this case, because of Marty's suggestion at this magical time, remember now, there's only one time of the year where I actually start thinking I better start writing a book. It's out now. So, because I have no clue what to do next. So I think to myself, it's not the idea that dead bodies are going to be found in Vermont Yankee. It's that Vermont Yankee was built in 1970, thereabout, early 1970s, late 1960s. That then becomes interesting to me because one of the other 36 jobs I had, I used to write history books, so I'm a historian by training. And I think this was in fact the transition time between rock-ribbed Republican Vermont and the Socialist Republican to Bernie Sanders. It all took about 6 months for that. And it was 1970. Well, this was not as graceful and as smooth as we all pretend it is now, because if you look at 1970, Vermont was a mess. All sorts of very curious things were going on. 60,000 people moved in here. Homicides went from 4 to 20 on an average, and those homicides were ghoulish. And on and on and on down the line. And in the midst of it, they were digging the biggest man-made hole in the history of Vermont concrete pouring. And guess where that was? Okay, well, I don't know about you, but if I'm going to bury a body, what material am I going to bury it in? So I went down. Marty kept me company. And I informed him, I said, well, part of my process, just so you know, Marty, is I take photographs because it takes me months. I put together all these other questions and research and whatnot, and I want to put them all together. And so maybe 6 months later or 5 months later, I'm putting together the book, and I can't remember if the reactor building is blue or green or whatnot. So I take photographs, and he looks at me very seriously. The hat had come off, so now I actually learned to see what he looked like. And he said, "Oh no, we can't allow you photographs. This is Vermont Yankee." Says that a lot. It's supposed to mean something. And I looked at him and I said, well, that's, can I sketch? I mean, it doesn't have to be. And he went, no, we don't. I'll take the pictures for you. Okay. So I decided, because I have, rumor has it I have a sense of humor, so I decided to tease him a little bit. So I looked at something that looked really fairly high security, and I said, take that, click. Click, click, click. There was nothing he didn't photograph, and he gave me all the photographs. Perfect spokesman. As far as I'm concerned. Anyhow, so we went around and we looked at all of this, and I came to the rapid realization that unlike Marty probably wanted the body to be floating in the blue pool at the heart of the reactor, well, you can't do that. There's got to be some vague similarity to truth in this. And if that plant is going to be left alone, and trust me, it better be left alone for a little while, then the concrete that's going to have to be destroyed in order to find who is buried in the concrete, because you don't just emote these things, you got to discover them, it's got to be a side building. Well, fortunately, there were two warehouses, the North Warehouse and, surprise, the South Warehouse. So I thought, all right, we'll just jackhammer one of those, and we'll introduce a little fictional, sleight of hand. We'll make the concrete deep enough that you could hide a body. I do make stuff up occasionally. And all that was well and fine and dandy. I took photographs, I figured it all out, that was just great, went back to my office, and immediately got a phone call from the spokesman telling me that they were jackhammering the South Warehouse. I thought, okay, better come up with a new book. So what did they find? Well, fortunately, the answer was nothing. Pure rubble from edge to edge. So at least now I know that in fact that conjuring up of fictional reality turned out to be nothing but reality. So now you know the locale, now you know why the locale, because I'm going to go start this book in 1970, a little bit of historical stuff, which I can't resist doing. I've done it in several of the other preceding books. But again, you want to sort of look at the whole world view of this gigantic project and this time in history, and my brain is just starting to circle around all this stuff, and I haven't even gotten through chapter 1 yet, so I'm very, very happy. I have no idea who's dead, who deaded him, how or why, okay? I mean, I'm already lost in this process. And I'm telling you this only because this is how all my books begin. I have no clue what I'm doing. I just sort of follow this enthusiasm down the road until I hit the end 300 pages later. And sometimes even then I change things around, like who the bad guy was. But in this case I didn't. But it gives me this richness to sort of bathe myself in. And one was that if you are going to do this project, it's going to cost a lot of money. Where's that money going to come from? Okay, and who is that money going to attract? Welcome to my world. The aforementioned resume, where obviously I have dabbled in miscreants, suggests that you might, along with legitimate investors and legitimate employees, might have a few people with legitimately broken noses showing an interest in the money flow of a God knows how expensive project. So once again, I decided to think, in the traditional world of fiction writing, you'll think mafia, right? Okay. Mafia, schmafia. How many mafia people do you think are interested in Vermont? Even in the biggest hole it's ever dug in recent economic history. So I went, no. I'm a middle-class boy. There must be middle-class crooks out there. I've met a couple. I've arrested one or two, in fact, okay? So somewhere between Vito and the guy who just knocked off your local Sunoco, there's got to be somebody who looked at Vermont Yankee with a mercenary interest. It had nothing to do with working for a living. So that's where I went. So there's a subplot in the book involved in that. Last but not least, I will introduce you, and we're still not out of chapter 1, so I haven't ruined anything. Last but not least is the scientist in me, wannabe, admittedly. My brother, the real scientist, sits among us, so I'm not going to flag flags that I don't deserve. But in fact, I picked his brains at dinner tonight about some future plot about robotic arms for Willie Kunkel. So he I guess what his first gesture is going to be. You know us well. So the idea is, a scientist to me immediately goes, okay, 1970, that's when the intubation has to take place, right? I mean, you can't just sort of drive into Vermont Yankee 2 years ago and start burying bodies. Even they'll notice you. So it had to have been 40 years ago. Well, no doubt, you can set your minds at ease. The question that's been keeping you up for the past several weeks, what does a dead body do in concrete over 40 years? I'm here to tell you. Okay? So breathe. You got two choices. One is that as you pour, Larry into the concrete and you pour it over the top of him and smooth it out nice and gently, that his finger sticks out. Okay? If that's the case, guess what's going to happen to Larry over 40 years? We just created a portal. Well, nature loves a portal. And so through that portal is going to come, shall we say, biology. And we're going to reduce Larry to a skeleton at best, okay? All right, that's fairly conventional. However, if someone folded Larry's finger over just before they completely wrapped him up in concrete, guess what you'll find 40 years later?
Larry.
Larry looking kind of like me on a bad day. I mean, no kidding. I have actually photographic proof. Admittedly, they're like 27 years and not 40 years. But I went to the Journal of Forensic Medicine, who, of course, nerds that they are, did a study of concrete burials in Los Angeles over a 25-year period. Totally illustrated. Got all that sent to me. And there's Larry, a little peaked, but nevertheless recognizable. It's like, oh God, Larry, where you been? Don't answer that. So my first thought was, that was way too cool. That was what I had to share with you guys, okay? But then I recognized that in the state of Vermont, there are only 12 of us. We all know each other. So you crack open the egg, there's Larry, and you go, oh, there's Larry. It's a very short chapter. I haven't had much fun at all. And it's all about me. So I thought, well, guess what? We're going to stick that finger out, and nature is going to take its place. And because I'm going to ask the question then again, if you crack open that metaphorical egg, and there is a skeleton residing therein, what else is there? No. The mold.
Oh, the mold.
Part of the article, the scientific study from Los Angeles, was in fact, admittedly this got a little grotesque. What happened was we didn't have quite the territory available that Vermont Yankee gave us. We had a bunch of buckets. So there, Larry, in Los Angeles got, shall we say, segmented and put in a variety of buckets. And in one of these buckets were some hands. And when you opened it up, the hands had left, because it was sacrete and very fine grained, fingerprints.
Oh.
That's what I said. So, okay, the heck with Larry looking like me. We got Larry looking like a skeleton, but we got Larry's mold. So now, admittedly, I'm ruining the book because I think I trespassed into chapter 2. But if you're going to bring Larry to his next of kin, who is someone, whoever that is, hasn't seen Larry for 40 years, how are you're not going to hold up a skull and say, but you might be able to hold up a latex mask and say, does that ring a bell? The weird part is, you gotta prepare yourself for this. The latex mask is going to have the same hairdo that we all had in the 70s. Those who had hair. Remember the mutton chop sideburns and all that, all those embarrassing photographs your mother refuses to throw out? Yeah. So anyhow, I had a lot of fun at that. Okay, so here we are, half an hour later, and I've described you a chapter and a half. So you have an idea of where I was enthusiastically heading for this duration of this book. I won't ruin anything else for you. It only takes, what did you say, a day to read it? Right? You were probably doing other stuff. But there you have it. So you now know, those of you who see me 20 times, I now lapse into prolonged silence. I hope not too terribly prolonged. And we do the question answer part of the evening, because I have no idea why anybody, my family excluded, would come to see me on multiple occasions. So raise a hand, ask a question, and we'll go into the conversational part of this evening. Yes, ma'am. 2 questions.
How much did the little man charge you for the photograph?
How much did the little man charge me for the photographs? He was so pleased to walk through his future door of employment with me on his arm that not a dime, not a dime. Also, it was inappropriate for the single most wealthy employer in the state of Vermont's history to charge anything, so it was all free. You know, having said that, one of the real kicks of doing this project with Vermont Yankee is that their resources are, of course, are unbelievable. And one of the resources they offered me, which I absolutely loved, was an archive of approximately 1,000 black and white photographs of the entire construction process.
Wow.
Every nut, every bolt, every pour of concrete, everything, every rebar that was tied in was documented. And so I watched this whole thing, this hole that went down 3-4 flights, all the way up to 3-4 flights in the air, was fully illustrated. So it was great because I was able to see not just the construction project, but the people building the project, which was far more interesting. So the hairdos, the trucks, the clothing, you know, I was able to immerse myself in that world. So it was quite a bit more useful than even he might have imagined. So you said 2.
The other question is, I see Margot is in here under acknowledgements.
Yes.
And then there's another, Mike Mayer.
Yes, that's Mike Mayer there. My brother is a retired orthopedic surgeon. They're always talking about me, so there you are. My mother is sitting right next to him, so so the whole family's here, at least the family that would dare. It's a huge family. This is the only 2 I could pay to come out. Margot being my wife, she decided she had something better to do. But anybody who helps me build a book gets acknowledged in the book. So it could be that they gave me 14 unmitigated hours of heavy sweat, or it could be that they suggested the title Presumption of Guilt. It doesn't matter what it was. If they were formative in the creation of this book, they get into the acknowledgments, unless I forget about them, of course, which I try not to do. So Margot gets in there because she's my primary editor, and she's the one who gets the very first manuscript every time. And of course just tears those shreds, and then I totally ignore them, and then we get into the usual thing that you can imagine, and somehow or another a compromise is reached. She also does all the business stuff and the marketing, and she does about 99% of the heavy lifting. I just swan about and come up with ideas. So that's why Margot gets in there. Michael gets in there because of his scientific / medical background. The man is a vacuum cleaner of arcane knowledge. Just as when we were sitting at the dining room table just now and I start talking about Willie Kunkel's sort of non-functional arm, and we begin to conjure up when we could do that. So if I decide to go down that, Mike in fact is going to be in next year's book, because we did some stuff about blowing up drones, I think, you know. nothing the man won't take on, and on down the line. And a lot of this harks back in 1988. I'm writing Open Season. There's a medical aspect there. I call up Mike and we sort stuff out, and so I acknowledge him. And then another book comes out, and I do the same thing. And then the third book comes out, and there's no medical stuff, so I didn't call him. Now, we're New England males. We don't talk to each other much. But I get this plaintive postcard. It's probably the second postcard I've ever had from you in all our lives together, right? And it says something about, like the latest book, felt a little left out. Oh, God. He likes me. He really likes me. So that's what gave birth to the skeleton's need. So that's how that works. God knows what the question was, but that's it. Who else? Yes, sir.
You say that you really don't know what's going to happen when you start, and it just kind of goes where it takes you. Putting the plots themselves aside, you have some characters that I think we've all grown fond of, and at least in one case, one that you killed off. Did you know that was going to happen at the beginning of that book, or did that just happen?
The weird thing, I've actually killed off several.
Well,
but
yeah.
I know who you're talking
Sure.
about, and in this case, you're right that I do a lot of research, like I was just describing with Tiny Marty. But it's research that could cover 4 different books, possibly, depending on which direction I chose to take. The direction is dictated by the pure momentum and the characters driving that momentum. So it's like crash course study in maps from point A to point B, then taking all those maps, throwing them out, getting in the car and driving. You've got the knowledge of the maps in your head. You haven't memorized it, but you have a sense of where you're going. But the specificity of your route is open to the enthusiasm of the moment. You never get lost as a result, but you're never quite sure how you're going to get where you're going to get, and maybe you may end up somewhere else, because why not?
right.
And the personalities are going to dictate that, because it has to make sense to the moment. So here I am. This guy lays down his crosshairs of his sniper rifle, and he's got 2 people, one of whom he needs to pick off. Now he has an objective. It really is neither one of those people. The objective is who's going to suffer as a result of the loss of either one of those people, which is Joe Gunther. He's not even there. Okay, this is all about suffering, deprivation, warning, that kind of thing. This is revenge. Now I'm writing that scene, and I drop those crosshairs on these 2 people, and until I wrote the sentence, I didn't know who was going to catch the bullet. And when I did, I remember stopping and kind of went, wow. And it was really like, I know this sounds truly bipolar, but wow, I didn't see that coming. That's when you should knock off for the day, but but then I'm committed. Okay, because with the same astonishment that came to me would be the same that you share. So after the book comes out, and even now people come up, in fact, I was damn near threatened with bodily assault 2 nights ago. A woman comes up, I hate what you did. Breathe. Several books ago. And I said, well, I wasn't too crazy about it either. To be honest, but that, in my other life, where I stand around these very still people, well, most of the time, they didn't see it coming either. And I now, even in my career as a medical examiner, I've probably done close to 600-700 cases, and maybe 10 of them knew what was coming and was looking forward to it with a a smile on their face, and everybody else, it was kind of, holy smokes, what was that freight train? And I've sort of gotten used to that, and I've gotten used to understanding that that happens to all of us all the time. When was the last time you went to bed at the end of the day knowing exactly that everything that happened to you that day was going to happen? You just don't, despite your best intentions. In a funny way, I paraphrase that by thinking, I start every day hoping I'll be Joe Gunther. For the first 5 minutes, I have my first Willie Kunkel moment. So it is with all things in life, and as it is in death. So, yeah, did I plan that? Hope for it? Did I really even know what to do with it after I'd set it in motion? Not really. And sometimes I think, oh damn, I wish I hadn't done that. But obviously it's okay. You pick up the pieces and you go forward, as do we all. Yes.
So you've never changed your mind, killed somebody and thought, oh no, and changed, who would know?
Yeah, well, who would know? My little friend Larry. I haven't. What I do change in these books, and I've done this maybe 3 or 4 times, I have changed the bad guy. I've written the entire book, and I've ended up with the beginning, the middle, and the end, and there's the end, and there's, the fiend, and I think to myself, it just doesn't work that well. And then you sit back and you kind of go, I want to pin the tail on that donkey there instead. And the funny thing is every time I've done that, it has taken 4 minor changes. I mean, the adage is that murder lurks in all of our hearts. Well, I'm here to tell you that as a chronicler of us, it's true. It's not that big a stretch. And the real beauty is almost inevitably, when those books came out, I'll always have someone come up and say, I never guessed that was the bad guy. Well, me neither. Never saw it coming. But it's got to have a little snap. I mean, if you see it coming, it's too much like real police work in a funny kind of way. I mean, I can say that having worn that hat, that oftentimes they go, oh, you did a nice job. Yeah, well, if they were any stupider, they would have locked themselves up and get out of the station house to find them. I mean, some of these guys are complete bozos. They do what they do for good reason. I remember doing, actually this is a very low profile thing, but there was a break-in enter. When I worked for Bellows Falls PD, there was a school was broken into, and the pharmacy, medical supplies that the kids had on, ADDs type stuff, medicines all stolen. And people were up in arms, drugs are on the street now, and someone had broken in, and blah, 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 and what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? I'm going off shift. I'm not going to do it. So my answer was, I'm not going to do anything about it because I'm such a wise ass. I can't just sort of give the company a line. Well, we've devoted all manpower and resources. No, I just said, I'm going home, and I'm not going to do anything about it. And of course, there was the usual shock and awe came back in a negative kind of way. And I said, what the hell do you mean? I said, oh, trust me, in several months, I'll have this solved. Because you don't do this kind of deed and keep it to yourself. That's not why you do it. The perfect crime, well, gosh, you got to tell someone you pulled it off. That instantly makes it the imperfect crime. So all you do is just keep your ears open, keep the conversation going, and eventually the guy just says, where you guys been, for God's sake? I broke into that place 6 months ago. Oh, I'm sorry, I got around to you. So that's exactly how that happened. So that's the reality to things. So I don't want to really write about reality. I'll do all the research into concrete and corpses and all that stuff. But when it gets to the bad guys, I will, dare I say, tart it up a little. Because otherwise I'd be writing short stories. I mean, in the policing community, the joke is step all over their civil rights and just pull over the cars that have the bumper sticker on them seemed like a good idea at the time. Your solve rate will go right through the roof. You know, because the impulsiveness of these guys is fairly transparent. So, yeah. Of course, good thing none of this is being recorded. So keep you out of trouble. Yes, sir.
Is number 28 Vermont-centric?
Yes, it is. Now there's a pregnant pause, and I struggle to remember what the hell it is. Okay, actually, Vermont, number 28. It's interesting. You should bring this up. You'll get paid later. It's a bit of a fat book. It's 350 pages so far, and we've just started the editing process, so that's going to take a while. It might grow, it might shrink, but it's about that. It occurred to me, speaking of real police work, that there's not a cop I know that doesn't have, at the bare minimum, some 15 cases going on simultaneously. That's just the nature of the job. And it's not the end of the world. I mean, they're all in various shapes and sizes of development and whatnot. You kind of keep them straight, and if you don't, well, who knows? And you just sweep it under the rug. You know, just blame someone else. Anyhow, so I am going to get in trouble for this. But, so I thought to put a little bit of reality onto what I've been doing with you for these now many, many years, whereby I've been taking this squad of elite detectives, giving them one crime, and we dedicate 300 pages to solving it, right? That's what we've been doing. And when you go to TV, you see exactly the same thing. You go to the movie house, you see exactly the same thing, right? One crime, 20 people, 6 months, and you got a solution, or not. Whereas, in fact, you've got dozens and dozens and dozens of cases being handled by these overworked, underpaid people. But you can't say that to readers because you can't be expected to handle 15 cases simultaneously in a single book. Especially if the squad has got 4 people, then it's 15 times 4 people. You'd go crazy. But I thought to myself, the least I could do is maybe take Joe, put him off stage a little bit just for the duration of this book, leave you his 3 primary investigators, Willie, Sam, and Lester, and give each one of them a single case. Now, everyone then looks at me and goes, oh, cool, and they'll all connect at the end. No, they won't. Read my lips, separate cases. Okay? 3 cases will go through this one book, and they'll never touch each other. But the investigators, of course, work together. So you will see how real investigators interact with each other and bounce ideas off each other. And at the same time, you'll be able to see just how crazy it can sometimes get and how busy it can sometimes get. Now, admittedly, I'm taking 15 to 30 cases and reducing them to 3, but I'm hoping that you'll get to visit a little bit of that world. Either that, or we won't meet next year. I have to ask Liza what she thinks of it. She'll tell you, this is dreadful. Yes.
Joe is aging, as are we all. How can he continue to walk across dams and beams in warehouses and leap from tall buildings?
A single pound.
I can. You can. You're as young as you feel. Joe Gunther is ageless. Joe Gunther is going to be sort of aging middle age for as long as I'm alive. The only mistake I created was at the very, very, very beginning of the series. I loved the idea that he was associated with the Korean War. That's because the grand plan was 5, maybe 6 books. I'd buy the island adjacent to Johnny Depp's. We would share outboard motors. So that clearly didn't work out. Here I am almost 30 books later, and Johnny Depp just never calls back, much less shares his Johnson outboard. So I have let any mention of the Korean War drift. Now, when we refer to his background, we say he was combat trained. I used to think along the lines of Grenada, but even that's becoming too old. So, you know, Iran 2 or whatever is coming to mind.
But now you have the baby.
The baby, yeah, well, exactly, yeah, and you had Willie Kunkel was once referred to as a Vietnam vet. Forget it, you know, so that doesn't work anymore. So I would just let go of that and stop doing the math. If I can, surely you can be. I don't really describe Joe Gunther. I do that so that you can do that to yourself. We are co-storytellers in these tall tales. And so, you know, if you'll be agreeable, then I won't talk about his age if you don't. And we'll probably be keeping each other company for another 30 years. Anyone else? Yes.
Where are all these people going?
Oh yeah, I love that. Yeah, Margot and I have a complete fit. So this is a shot of the St. Martin's Macmillan, whatever. Everybody owns everything anyhow, whatever they're called. But St. Martin's or Minotaur Press has come out with this, The Look, and the look is somebody either walking away or now walking towards. So there's a touch of optimism. You know, they're now turning around and coming back at us. Margot is actually a designer. Don't ever mention these in her presence. She turns violent. She's found this look shared with other authors. So they, you know, the publisher says, "Oh, this is Joe Gunther's identity." That's complete bourgeois. There are about 3 other authors that have the Joe Gunther identity, so we're sharing it far and large. We now have some humor as to, oh good, you know, what do we got now? We ought to drop a tree on the guy next time, stuff like that, or he's up to here in water, walking manfully away, on and on and on. I have no idea why they came up with that, but they're terribly, terribly proud of it. And if your publisher is proud of what they do, you be proud with them. This tape will self-destruct in 10 minutes. I've said so many bad things on this recording. Who else? That's it. You didn't want to get me in trouble. I thank you very much for a splendid evening.